Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Week 13 of the NFL season. This is the War Room powered by Pro Football Focus, and I'm your host, Jeff Ratcliffe. Boy, it's getting to the end. It's getting darn close. Some fantasy playoffs starting this weekend, most of them starting up next weekend, and we're here to get you prepped. Of course, with me, as always, my co-hosts, Mike Clay and Pat Thorman. And we're already getting feedback, so you gotta love that. Mike, what's going on this morning?
Oh, not too much. Good to be back on here. A little pressure off this week. I'm not hosting, so we're glad to have you back, Jeff. So you can handle that ruckus. So enjoy.
Always love hosting, and I know it is insanity all over the place, but glad to be back. And Pat, how are you, my man?
I'm great. Counting down the minutes to Packers and Patriots. Could very easily be a Super Bowl preview, although your guys' Eagles put on a heck of a showing on Thursday night, so I'm sure they'll be heard from too.
Yeah, how crazy is that? The Eagles go in and get pretty much destroyed by Green Bay, and then they do the same thing to Dallas. So, yeah, it's really shaping up to be an interesting playoff run, and that's a great segue because I did want to bring up the fact that while we are ending the season or getting close to the end of the season here with roughly a month left of regular season fantasy action, we don't stop at PFF Fantasy. I mean, maybe we take a little bit of time off after the Super Bowl, but we're right back in. Mike's getting rankings together. I'm getting rankings together. Pat's getting rankings together in February. So, but the important thing here is that we don't stop during the playoffs, the NFL playoffs. Fantasy playoffs during the NFL playoffs is really becoming, or fantasy leagues, is becoming increasingly popular, and we do everything that we do essentially in the regular season for the postseason. We have projections, we have rankings, we tell you, we break it down from the beginning how to draft strategies in salary cap leagues. So if you're on the fence still about getting a subscription, you get a discounted price and you get all that playoff info that'll help you in your playoff leagues this year. So make sure you go ahead and do that. And of course, if you're already subscribing, of course, we thank you for that. Now let's get into the action for today. There's a lot going on across the league. Even though we had 3 games on Thursday, it's still a full slate of games today. And remember, if you're watching this on YouTube, hashtag War Room. We'll do our best to get to all of those questions. And by the way, if you're still watching this, congratulations, because you're still in the hunt for a championship, and that is just awesome. So keep going with that. We'll get to all your questions in the chat. We have some people lining up in the chat. And we already have a question in, so we're going to roll with Jimmy's question first here, guys. And he said, who between Mike Evans and Keenan Allen? And he wants to know why. And I don't have any information from Jimmy here, whether it's a PPR or not. I don't know if it necessarily really matters here. But who are you going with that one, Mike? Oh, it is PPR. Mike Evans or Keenan Allen?
Yeah, easy one here for me. I'm definitely going with Mike Evans. The guy's been red hot. I mean, obviously you can't expect him to keep up this touchdown rate he's on right now, but he's pretty safe bet for, we'll say 9 to 11 targets, maybe even more. The way Tampa Bay's struggling and playing catch up in the second half. So, you look back. I've been kind of a Vincent Jackson apologist all season long because he's getting the target volume and he's a good player. He just was not getting the touchdowns. The end zone touchdown rate just wasn't very good. Mike Evans, on the other hand, is now essentially moved ahead of Jackson on the target totem pole. He's getting a massive amount of looks, and he is scoring the touchdown. So obviously you're looking at a wide receiver 1 there. Keenan Allen, high target volume, but lots of underneath work. Not getting the end zone targets we'd like to see. Only 2 touchdowns this season. I think he can score more down the stretch here, but not enough to put him on Evans' level.
Pat, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, Evans has just been a machine. I mean, and until he stops producing, you can't sit him at all. I do like Keenan Allen this week a little more than I typically do. Baltimore has struggled against the pass, and the front seven's pretty strong against the run. So I do like Keenan Allen relative to his usual area, but he's not on Evans' level.
Yeah, that Baltimore secondary has been banged up since losing Jimmy Smith for the season. It's a decent play, but you're not sitting Mike Evans at this point. Again, the year of the rookie, the real year of the Wookiee wide receiver, the year of the rookie wide receiver. Incredible out of Odell Beckham, incredible out of Evans, even Kelvin Benjamin, and so many more. I mean, we could just do a whole show on the rookie wide receivers. So you do like Mike Evans there. And Troy, actually, a follow-up here. We were talking about Vincent Jackson. Okay, so Mike, you're probably the biggest apologist for Vincent Jackson, but the targets are there, and we actually saw a little bit of a revitalization maybe last week. So what are your thoughts about him this week? Expectations for Vincent Jackson?
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate him. I mean, I'm not in the wide receiver one category anymore. I hung in there for a while just because he was still the number one, and then Mike Evans got hurt, so you knew they were just going to keep coming every single game. He's still pretty high, but again, he's kind of swapped roles with Evans. Basically, he's now pretty much second in line there. So Cincinnati, tough pass defense there, but again, you anticipate Cincinnati probably leading throughout a lot of this game, so Tampa Bay's going to have to throw the football. And, Josh McCown's been a mid-pack quarterback one when he's played the entire game this season. So, he's definitely, this passing game's definitely producing. So I still like Jackson. I think he's a borderline wide receiver, too.
Yeah, you have to like how the game script will set up. Pat, I know you've been maybe a little bit more down on Jackson compared to Mike. So your thoughts on Jackson for this week?
I agree, based on volume, based on, like you said, game script, and also based on the fact that Tampa Bay's running game is a mess. He's going to get the volume this week. He's going to probably approach wide receiver 2 status. He's kind of more on Keenan Allen's level than Mike Evans, for example.
Yeah, certainly the lower ceiling with Jackson, but should see some volume here. The game script should set up nicely if you're especially looking in maybe a PPR. I know his catch rate isn't necessarily ideal, but I see him in that same range, that borderline wide receiver 2. Would not surprise me at all if he's a top 20 scorer this week, but the ceiling is a lot more limited. All right, we're going to toss over to Twitter. We have some questions lining up on Twitter. If you're watching on YouTube, certainly you can get your questions answered. #WarRoom. Hey, if you're in the Hangout itself, we have a couple folks in here, and you want to ask some questions, fire away, folks. All right, so running back question, and he has this is our buddy Basilio on Twitter. He has Pierre Thomas, Bishop Sankey, and Terrence West in a half point PPR. He only needs to start one of those. Mike, Pierre Thomas, Bishop Sankey, Terrence West, who are you going with?
Pretty close one. I have these guys all as, we'll say, strong flex options, basically running back 3, so I don't really love any of them. I think if you're going upside here, it has to be the guy who's the number 1 running back on his team, and that's Bishop Sankey. Houston, tough run defense that's going to, keep Sankey's hands full, obviously, but obviously this guy has a ton of talent, and it's just, we're at some point you would think second round, first running back off the board, guy has speed, you think he's going to break one eventually. So again, I don't love him, but I think he's clearly the player with the most upside of this group.
Pat?
Yeah, I agree with that. He's going to get more work. Terrence West will probably be involved, although Correll's, he's starting to kind of separate just based on talent. And that game is supposed to be kind of windy and rainy, so it might skew a little more to the ground. But Sankey's the guy.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that one. So going with Sankey, hopefully no vulture touchdowns in this game. All right, Troy, another question to follow up here. In a PPR league, he's asking Torrey Stills or Duke. And this is an interesting one for a number of reasons here, especially, Kenny Stills kind of pops off this list for me, but that's my DFS mind coming out. He's $5,100 on FanDuel this week. And those of you who read my column, I love him this week. But, Mike, if you have those choices there in a PPR, who are you going with?
You know what? This is going to sound weird, but I've never heard anyone nicknamed Duke before, so who is that?
That's why I just said Duke.
Who is it?
I don't know. I mean, the only Duke that I know of plays on the defensive side of the ball, and he's a safety for the Bills.
Maybe he means Nuke. Oh, Nuke, you mean...
there we go.
Duke. Okay. All right, that makes all more sense. This is tough because I have these guys all back to back to back. Hopkins, Stills, Torrey Smith. So Hopkins I think has the highest ceiling here. Again, he's been producing at times wide receiver one level. Obviously, Houston offense takes a step back here with Ryan Mallett going down. So I don't love him. I have to imagine I'm pretty low on him, but relative to Stills and Torrey Smith, I think he's still the play.
What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I guess his upside's capped a little bit by Fitzpatrick, but in the 3 games before Fitzpatrick was benched, he was kind of getting it going. He averaged about 10 targets a game, just under 100 yards and a touchdown, I believe. So he was coming on a little bit, even with the Amish rifle. So I definitely would choose him, even despite Still's glow in DFS, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I actually checked into my rankings, and I have them all right in the same range as well. So it's a really tough choice. I'm still slightly higher. I just think because of the game script, and again, this could be a trap game, this New Orleans-Pittsburgh game, but I do feel that the game script projects to a higher scoring affair. Stills coming off an impressive game last week, 9 targets. So I do like him slightly more. Couldn't fault you for playing Hopkins. I certainly think Torrey Smith's the odd man out there. So for me, it would come down to those two. And I'm leaning slightly towards the guy with the better quarterback, though certainly Hopkins, plenty of upside. And by the way, again, going back to those DFS plays, Ryan Fitzpatrick, $5,000. I mean, how can you beat that in FanDuel? That's almost as cheap as they come. I know it almost hurts to start Ryan Fitzpatrick, but think what you can do with the rest of your lineup. Really intriguing play in cash games and GPPs this week. Really like Ryan Fitzpatrick. So really, you got 2 for Hopkins, 1 for Stills. It's close, almost a coin flip for me ultimately. George, a quick question about Levante David. I know this is a tough one. DNPs on Wednesday and Thursday, got limited working on Friday. I didn't see anything about a Saturday practice report, though the news is actually positive regarding David. He does expect to play, so you have to like that. And this isn't one of those things where he's just blowing smoke. I really do expect to see him on the field, though I'd be prepared with a backup play. It looks like you have C.O. Moore. You want to go safe. C.O. Moore is a good play. Obviously, Levante David is my number 1 linebacker, though, if he does play this week. So keep a close eye on that one. As we get some information as well, we'll be updating throughout the show. But another question from George regarding flex play and a PPR. He needs 2, actually. He's got Mike Evans, Odell Beckham, Bryant, and Denard Robinson. I think this one's pretty straightforward, guys. I mean, for me, this is Evans and Beckham. Mike, do you disagree?
You know what? This is tough because I like Denard. What do you say, PPR?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, PPR, I'll go with the 2 wide receivers, but I actually still think it's pretty close. I like Denard Robinson a lot. He's seeing a pretty hefty percentage of the touches in that backfield, even though Toby Gerhart's been plenty involved, and of course Jordan Todman plays there on third downs. Obviously, a struggling offense. It's hard for him to find the end zone, but going up against the Giants' defense, a run defense that's arguably been the worst in the league over the last month and a half, 2 months. So it's a prime opportunity to use Denard Robinson this week. That being said, I think at PPR, Evans, Beckham just seeing such a gigantic volume of the targets, and tough matchups for both of those guys, but they're talented enough and they get enough opportunity to warrant your attention. I think both of them are wide receiver 1 options.
What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, I agree with that, and I also agree that it's close. I do like Shoelace this week. I know about 90% of the public is on the Giants this week, and it's kind of an away game in a boring spot down in Jacksonville. So I kind of like the Jags for an upset. But that being said, I do agree you can't argue with the upside of Beckham and Evans.
Yeah, this Jags team, they're sneaking up on people, I think. Better pass rush than people realize. Chris Clemens coming off a monster game last week, 3 sacks basically almost right away. So this could be a lot bigger challenge for the Giants than I think people realize. And it's one of those situations maybe we don't get the fantasy numbers that we expect potentially out of certainly somebody like Eli Manning. but you can't sit Odell Beckham at this point. He's just it's outrageous. It's outrageous how good this guy's been playing over the last month, and Evans as well. So, very good that you have those two on your roster. Start with confidence. Question from Austin here regarding a flex spot. In a standard league, he's got Jeremy Hill, Martavis Bryant, and Lamar Miller. So this is interesting. Jeremy Hill, obviously in a situation where now we're seeing more of a split there between him and Gio Bernard. Bryant's kind of cooled off a little bit in a potential shootout, though. And then Lamar Miller in a really strong matchup. So what are you doing there if you have that dilemma, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one for me. I've had people asking me this week why I'm so, relatively high on Lamar Miller. I have him as a decent running back 2 option. Obviously the matchup here is tough going up against the Jets' run defense, which is very good, and you expect Miami to throw the ball a lot against the Jets' weak secondary. So you wouldn't expect this to be a huge game for Miller, but I've been looking at this long and hard. I still think he's a threat to be right around 18 touches, and the Jets give up a lot of touchdowns. All it takes is for them to get, a snap or two inside the 5-yard line, and Lamar has a great chance to score a touchdown in that spot. I know they like to work Daniel Thomas in there as well, and Damian Williams in the mix. Now LaMichael James getting a few touches, but I think Miller's going to play enough in a game where Miami can score a lot of points that he's still worthwhile as a strong play this week. So I like him more than Hill for that reason. Hill kind of trading off there with Gio Bernard. And Martavis Bryant, it's a standard league, so you're going to go with the running backs here. Bryant more of, I'll say, probably comfortable as a strong wide receiver 3.
Yeah, that's fair to say. But that is a tough choice coming down between Hill and Miller. What are you doing, Pat? Do you agree with Mike, or are you leaning towards Hill?
Yeah, I agree with Mike on both counts that I take Miller, and I also agree that it's really close, especially in the standard league. You're not worried about Hill, losing relative points because of the passing games that he's not so involved in. But the Jets, haven't given up haven't given it up on the ground a little bit lately. Muhammad Wilkerson's not going to play. Sheldon Richardson, who's also a great run stuffer, he's questionable with a back injury. It looks like he's going to play, but their run defense is not quite what it was early in the season. And you think Miami's going to be grinding down the clock in the fourth quarter. And Miller's workload has kind of been edging up as he's gotten more healthy. So I do like Miller in a game that Miami should take control of.
Richardson was upgraded to probable, so he is going to play. But, yeah, I'm going to agree with you guys there. I do like Hill, in a standard league over Bernard. So if you maybe had that decision to make, then you would probably lean towards Hill there. But Miller is going to be the play there. Troy says that he thinks Chris Borland is a cyborg. I don't know if I go that far, but he's pretty darn close. And what's interesting about Borland is he's getting Luke Kuechly comparisons, which is not what we expected out of the pre-draft process. I really thought this guy was going to be a 2-down thumper, but he's showing that he has some chops in coverage. But the really intriguing thing for you IDP folks, especially in dynasty situations, is what does San Francisco do next year? They have Patrick Willis and Navarro Bowman, who will both be healthy, hopefully, by the preseason, by the OTAs, hopefully. I don't expect to see Bowman on the field the rest of this season. And then Borland, how do you keep this guy off the field? And we can't put all 3 of them out there. So this is going to be a really intriguing offseason for the 49ers. Jim has an IDP question for us here, and he's asking about, in a big play league, does he start Morgan Burnett, Jason McCourty, or Ron Parker? And the Ron Parker situation, I guess we should say as well that, thoughts, prayers, positive vibes going out to Eric Berry, everybody associated with Eric Berry. Just a really awful situation, and hoping for the best for Berry in a quick, speedy recovery, and hope to see him back on the field next year. But, hey, this does open up an opportunity for Ron Parker. And we've seen Parker put up some good numbers this season. However, if you own Morgan Burnett, you can't go away from him. He's facing the Patriots, which is a fantastic matchup for defensive backs. Burnett is an elite play this week, so there's really no question there for me. You're starting Burnett. He also asks about Justin Houston facing Peyton Manning, Junior Gillette, and Charles Johnson. Honestly, in that situation, there's that inkling to start Johnson, though I don't see how you go away from Houston. Houston is essentially matchup proof. He's an elite level pass rusher, so you are gonna just stick, dance with your date, stay with the girl you brung, and that's Houston certainly in this situation, starting him regardless of matchup. Back over to Twitter. Hey, if you're hanging out too and you want to get some questions asked or answered, you can certainly get them in the chat here, or if you're just watching on YouTube, remember hashtag War Room, and we'll get to all your questions throughout the show. In a half-point PPR, Mike, running back, wide receiver, flex. Oh boy. So I guess who are you sitting out of Matt Asiata, Ryan Matthews, Stills, and LaFell? So you're sitting one player out of that bunch.
What format?
Half-point PPR.
Half-point PPR. All right, I'm actually going to use Asiata here. I think that he's the riskiest, but I think that he's definitely going to play. I mean, I can't imagine he's going to be behind Ben Tate, and he should be ahead of Joe Banyard. He missed a week. That shouldn't knock him behind Banyard. So it could be a rotation, but I think against Carolina, he's a play here. I'm not a huge Ryan Matthews guy, especially going up against a tough Baltimore run defense. Brandon Oliver probably playing more than people realize. So I'm not a huge Matthews guy. So I'm actually going to go with the wide receivers here in half-point PPR. That really makes a difference. LaFell, by the way, I should have mentioned him. He's the top play here. LaFell definitely in lineups in a game where New England's going to have to throw the ball against Green Bay. They'll try and grind it between the tackles. They're going to have to throw, though. So I like LaFell, Asiata, and I'm going to go Torrey over Ryan Matthews. I know that's probably not going to be popular. Probably disagree with me. I know I'm low on Matthews, but that's where I'm going.
What do you think, Pat?
I will sit Asiata. I just, coming back from an injury, you have Banyard, like Mike said, indeterminate what Tate's going to do. And I think they'll be able to throw the ball a little bit on Carolina as well. Anyway, it's a fairly low-volume offense. So Matthews doesn't have a good matchup for sure, but I think he'll get more work. So I'd sit Asiata.
A follow-up question. I'll stick with you, Pat, because this game, obviously, the game of the week, potential Super Bowl preview. Two of the hottest teams over the last month and a half or so, Green Bay and New England. And the talk is, okay, is New England going to slow the game down? We've seen that as a similar pattern throughout the season against these explosive offenses. Are we going to see a lot of LeGarrette Blount, potentially Jonas Gray? What's your expectations? I know you follow this team very closely. What are your expectations for game flow, game script? And then, Mike, following it up, just tossing it over to you right after for your expectations. So, Pat, what do you think?
Oh, I think that they would like to, and the matchup certainly dictates that you're going to try to run it. I think PFF has Green Bay ranked 29th, 28th in run defense, and obviously they have excellent cornerbacks. So you want to try to run as long as you can. You keep Aaron Rodgers off the field, take the same tack they took against Andrew Luck, and put that third tackle on. How long that'll work, I'm not really sure. How long we'll be able to keep that up? I mean, Green Bay, I think, is more well-rounded than Indy is. So if they do have to start hurrying up, which they've shown a tendency to do, LeGarrette Blount's not going to be that useful. He's not a guy who does very well with the hurry-up. He's kind of one-dimensional. So at that point, you're going to get Shane Vereen on the field, and even Jonas Gray is probably more well-suited for the Patriots' hurry-up than Blount is. So I know everyone kind of wants to play Blount and hope that he does what Gray did against Indy, but I don't think he fits a full game plan like that, especially just being on the team for a couple weeks.
What do you think about this game, Mike? Because obviously, a very intriguing game, potential for a lot of fantasy points. So, how do you envision this game going for the Packers and Patriots?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tricky because the game script's gonna have a lot to do with it. I mean, New England's gonna come out, they're gonna try and run the football. If they have success and get the lead, they're gonna keep doing that throughout the game. You're gonna see a lot of LeGarrette Blount and Jonas Gray, as Pat mentioned, not as much of Shane Vereen, who I don't like particularly well this week. That being said, if New England falls behind in this, Green Bay hits Jordy Nelson and Cobb early on, you're gonna have to see a change from New England, and you're gonna have to see more Shane Vereen involved in the game, and that's going to kill Blount, kill Gray's fantasy value. So it's a tough one, but I think what you're going to see is again an attempt by New England to run the ball early, and I think you're going to see kind of that change throughout the game as the game is more competitive in the second half. But I definitely think that's the game plan. I think it's pretty obvious that with Green Bay doing pretty well against the pass but struggling against the run, and vice versa pretty much for New England over the last month and a half. You're seeing pretty much the exact opposite. So it makes it tricky, but I think it's going to be a pretty competitive game, and that's where you're going to see the game flow kind of shift in the second half.
One interesting guy is going to be Tim Wright, because he's going to add some versatility to what they do, especially if they do have to shift to a more open offense. Green Bay has a good depth at cornerback, so you can keep them more of a base situation if you have the two tight ends on the field. You kind of minimize their advantage on that front. So just having Edelman and LaFell on the outside with the double tight ends, that adds a little bit more of a complication for the Packers defense. And as far as just mentioning Edelman, this is one of the first weeks in a while that I've really been on Edelman. I think he's going to play a large role in this game in both scenarios, whether the Patriots are running and just trying to move the sticks, or whether they got to catch up. So I think Edelman is the best play among the Patriots non-Gronk offensive weapons.
There is certainly opportunity to exploit this Packers defense with Clay Matthews. He's playing, certainly not all of his snaps on the inside, but when he is on the inside, obviously he looks uncomfortable. I mean, he's just a freak athlete, so he's performing certainly well enough, better than anything else they have, but he is exploitable, and I wouldn't be surprised if Belichick game plans for that and tries to really go after Matthews when he's on the inside. So something to watch for certainly there. Obviously, we're lucky there's one other game, so everybody's going to be glued to that game and really get to watch it closely. Great. All right, Eric has a question about a quarterback streamer for next week. Look into the fantasy playoffs, obviously getting ahead, always good to be ahead of your competitors. And he says he needs a home run. Now, remember, the philosophy here is pick the guy who's going to score the most points, right? And it comes down to Kyle Orton against Denver, Teddy Bridgewater versus the Jets, or Eli Manning versus Tennessee. Mike, looking forward to next week. You have to grab one of those guys. Who are you stashing?
Yeah, this is tough. I'm liking Orton. I looked at it in my projections here. I have Orton as a borderline quarterback one. The only problem here is they're playing Denver. That's obviously a pretty good defense there. But the reason you'll like him is because they're probably going to have to throw the football a ton in this game, and that kind of separates him from guys. He's also, playing a little bit better than their Bridgewater and Eli. Tennessee defense is not probably as bad as people realize. They just kind of assume since Tennessee stinks that they'd be a plus matchup. They're not a great one, so I don't love Eli. He also turns it over quite a bit, as we know. Bridgewater, I don't think he can be trusted even against that horrible Jets secondary. I would not feel good about him in my lineup. For me, my comfort zone's Orton. I think he's the right play here.
How about you, Pat?
Well, for now, I agree, but I do want to see what Teddy does against Carolina. I watched the Green Bay game to kind of look at Charles Johnson, and you saw a little bit more from Teddy than you had been seeing. If he continues to progress, as he's getting more reps, I think that has a possibility to be just a little bit better of a choice than Orton. Like Mike said, Tennessee's defense is not all that easy against the pass. Their run defenses, so you'd expect the Giants to really pound them there. And Orton right now would probably be the choice, but Denver's got good cornerbacks as well, and that's not exactly a dynamic passing game. So I kind of keep the window open for Teddy just and see how he performs today.
An interesting note about the Tennessee defense, in 11 games this season, they've allowed more than one touchdown pass just twice. Last 6 games, it's just been one touchdown pass, and these have been some decent quarterbacks. The Eagles' offense last week, the Steelers the week before, the Ravens. We've seen some big touchdown performances out of Joe Flacco, Ben Roethlisberger, Sanchez even, and they've been holding them tight. So that's a tricky matchup, and could see a lot of Rashad Jennings next week in that very, very, very favorable matchup for running backs. So I'm going to agree. It's probably Orton here. I don't know if I want to rely on a rookie quarterback in the first week of the playoffs and one who isn't really setting the world on fire. And a question looking forward, maybe folks in dynasty leagues, maybe folks who are already starting to prep. I don't know if that means your season's over, but Mike, Adrian Peterson, obviously, just a lightning rod so far this season, and just the whole situation is awful. But we have to face the facts. He's very likely going to be back on the field next year. We don't know in what uniform yet. and he's an aging player, but still has the skills to put up some really strong fantasy numbers. So I know we're really not necessarily doing projections yet for next season, but what are your thoughts and expectations for Peterson in 2015?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely need to be concerned about durability. I mean, he's probably not going to be on Minnesota, but I think he'll go somewhere to a running back needy team where, listen, a team's not going to go out and acquire him. It'd probably be via trade. Regardless, though, I don't think any team's going to bring him in with the intention of making him a committee back. He should be relatively fresh coming off a full season off, basically. And he's going to be 30, but with his season off and with his history, you have to imagine that he probably has another good season in him, at least one full good season. But again, durability will be a concern. He's going to be 30, and you don't know what kind of offense he's going to be in. He could go to a team that likes to throw the football. So there's definitely some concerns. I'd hate to be worried about him. I'd rather just let it be someone else's problem. But if you're in position to get him very cheap, or you have him sitting there and can't get much in return, I have that issue in one dynasty league where nobody would give me anything. I couldn't get like a prospect, so I'm just kind of stashing him. It's just let it ride out. I think he's going to end up in a different city where he ends up as a feature back, should see right around 20 touches a game, and could end up being a running back one next year for sure.
Yeah, what are you doing in that situation, Pat?
Yeah, I mean, just like Mike said, I mean, there's so much ambiguity. Most of it is going to come down to where he lands. But like you said, he could be on a team that likes to throw a lot. He could be on a team that wants to feature him. Look at you could be on New England. They have nobody really signed next year besides LeGarrette Blount now has got an extra year, and a couple of rookies that who knows about. Could go to Arizona. You never know where he's going to go. So if you are holding on to him in a dynasty league, like Mike said, you're not going to get a lot for him. So you might as well see what it is. And if he's a sunk cost, he's a sunk cost. Kind of in a similar situation to Ray Rice, only the ceiling is a heck of a lot lower on that front.
Yeah, don't expect any movement on this until the off season. There's whatever team acquires him, or if it is the Vikings, who knows? They're gonna want a buffer zone before the start of the season for things to die down a little bit. So right now, I mean, it's really all just speculation with Peterson. But it's not speculation with team defenses this week. And Jimmy has a question with the St. Louis defense facing the Raiders. And he says, Mike has you looking at picking up Cincinnati. But my projections this week love the Bengals in as the number 3 defense. And I don't know. I actually, this is one of those situations where I kind of doubted the projections because of their pass rush. The Bengals have really had an inability to get to the quarterback, and that's concerning. They're not racking up sacks, and this is a defense historically that was really their bread and butter over the last few seasons. But I'm going to toss this over to you, Mike. I think you have the Bengals as a top 5 play. If you were in that situation, what would you do facing St. Louis or Cincinnati? Who would you go with?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of trusted in my good old projections here. I do like Cincinnati going up. Mine probably lean a little towards, leaning on teams who have good matchups. And frankly, the Tampa Bay offense is when you expect to turn the ball over. You don't expect them to do much on the ground, be the running game, and you think McCown will throw a touch or an interception or two. And frankly, the Cincinnati defense is pretty good. They've had their ups and downs this season for sure. But it's a game where I think they can kind of keep Tampa Bay in check here and only give up a touchdown or two. So I do. I think they're a top 5 play, and I like them considerably more than St. Louis.
All right. How about you, Pat?
I'm actually going to go the other way. I can see the allure of Cincinnati. The matchup is good. You're not worried about that big run, like Mike said. They play good defense. They play good pass defense, and McCown is a little turnover prone. But St. Louis is at home. Latavius Murray's not going to play. They've shown nothing else on the ground absent Latavius Murray, and they have a good pass rush. Carr doesn't do that well with a rush in his face. I think the upside is a lot higher with the Rams.
Yeah, both are going to be strong plays, I think, this week. I'm going to lean towards the Rams as well, just because they've been the hotter unit, and I'm kind of going with the flow here. Both are really good matchups, but it is interesting that both Mike's projections and my projections really like the Bengals, and this is one of those cases where they're really matching up. So I couldn't fault you for making that play, though. I'm going to stick with the Rams there. A couple inactives already coming in here. Levante David is inactive, okay? So you're going to want to get him out of your lineups. Remember, like last week, Mason Foster is going to be every down, obviously, and Danny Lanzano will also play every down in that situation. If it's me, I'm taking Foster there. Lanzano's a sneaky play, though. He's an LB3 with upside. We've seen this guy take pick sixes twice this season, and so he certainly is an intriguing play if you're in a pinch. But the preference would go to Mason Foster there. And we'll get some more inactives in a minute here. But a quarterback question for the rest of the season, going through the playoffs for Troy, between Big Ben, Matt Stafford, and Mark Sanchez. Mike, if you have to take one of those guys to the championship, who you bringing with you?
It's for rest of season or
rest of season.
And it's you got to give them to me one more time. What is it? Ben, Sanchez, and who?
Stafford.
And Stafford. It's hard to get too excited about Stafford. I mean, I know he's coming off the nice game against Chicago, but that offense has been dreadful this season. Sanchez, I'm still not, I'm a believer in Chip Kelly and this offense, and I think they can make Sanchez thrive. But Sanchez, I still think you have to look at him as turnover prone. He got away with a couple early on in that Dallas game. He played pretty well, but enough to knock him down my list a little bit here. And also Nick Foles could be back. He may make a surprise early return week 16, and then you're stuck. So for me, it's definitely Big Ben here. I like him as a top 10 option going forward this season. So he's not going to turn it over as often. Should get plenty of passing touchdowns. This is a team that loves to throw the football near the end zone. Not a ton of rushing touchdowns as as Le'Veon Bell owners know too well. So I think Ben, plenty of chance to score a lot of touchdowns down the stretch here.
What would you do, Pat?
I would go with the Sanchez, just based purely on volume. That offense, whether the quarterback plays really well or not, has produced fantasy-worthy starters, all season. And you look at Ben's, his schedule. He's at Cincinnati. He has a pretty good matchup at Atlanta, and then he's home for Kansas City. So it's not too great. And the Steelers actually score 17 more points at home than they do on the road. So 2 of the next 3 after this week are on the road. And I just think that Sanchez has a higher ceiling on a more consistent basis, and he's got after next week, which you must say is Seattle, he's got Dallas and then Washington. So it sets up really, really well for the 2 championship weeks, 15 and 16.
It does certainly set up well, but that potential for Foles to get back in the mix is a little shaky, a little scary. Hopefully, maybe you can grab 2 of them and roster Ben and Sanchez. Possibly a better situation there, and you can stream a little bit between the 2 of them. All right, and looking through here, we got some folks on Twitter shooting us some questions. So I want to definitely get to Giles' question. Giles, a War Room regular, and he needs a tight end in standard scoring, and he needs to pick up the tight end. So here's the best available. Couple banged up players here, Jordan Cameron, Charles Clay. Cameron, I believe, is already ruled out, so you're not going to worry about him. And I guess this maybe is for rest of the season because he mentions Ertz as well. Rudolph, Vernon Davis, Cook, Selleck, Graham. Are you taking any? Are you picking up any of these guys, Mike? If you absolutely have to, is there one that maybe sticks out of that list?
Just off the names he's listing, I would say probably Rudolph does. I mean, he hasn't done a ton since he's been back, but definitely there's opportunity in that offense. They need guys who can get open and catch the football. I mean, this is not an offense that's going to thrive with Charles Johnson as their go-to receiver. He was just force-fed the ball last week for some reason, and it didn't go too well. It did all right, but this is Charles Johnson. He has upside, but he's not a guy that you want to build your passing game around. So. Definitely some opportunity there for Rudolph. Ertz has some appeal, not quite as much just because he's so inconsistent. And if you're focusing on this week, the dart I would throw is either it's Deion Sims or Jacob Tamme there in Miami and Denver respectively. Tamme didn't play quite as often last week, but this is a guy who should be on the field about half the time, maybe a little more, and could easily score 2 touchdowns. We've seen it before. At times this is a tight end friendly offense, and Tamme is a capable receiver. So even in this offense, he's not a bad dart throw, and Deion Sims saw plenty of targets last week. This week he's going up against the Jets defense that gives up plenty. So I like both of those guys as top 15 options.
Yeah, and just updating the Julius Thomas situation. Obviously, we're not going to get any clear indication before the end of this show, but Jason Lockenfora earlier this morning said that it doesn't sound promising for Julius Thomas. So make sure if you're in those situations, I got a couple questions on Twitter this week. Maybe you have Thomas and somebody like Kelsey or somebody like that. You're going to fade Thomas. It's just the safer play. You don't want to wind up with a goose egg. Unless you maybe have Tammy, then you can obviously wait until game time and make that switch if necessary. And following this up, we were talking about Rudolph, okay? And Brad on Twitter has a question for us regarding Rudolph in a standard league. He's going between Rudolph and Jordan Reed. Pat, I'll toss this one to you first. If you have to make a decision between those two guys, tight end just absolutely brutal this season. Really horrible, horrible year for tight ends. So you're just hoping to get something out of your tight end position. Who do you go with there?
I'd stick with Rudolph this week. Jordan Reed's going to probably split some time with Paul. I mean, he was a little bit touch and go to play, but I did just come across that he will be active. Jordan Reed will. And McCoy did show a little propensity to throw to his tight end when he wasn't there earlier this season. But Rudolph, I think, is the better play this week. They obviously have some issues with their running game. You're not sure what's going to go on with that. And like Mike said earlier, it's pretty much Charles Johnson or nothing as far as other receivers go. And Rudolph looked a little bit better last week. So that would be my call, Rudolph over Reed.
Are you doing the same thing, Mike?
What was that one? I missed it.
Jordan Reed or Kyle Rudolph?
Oh, definitely Reed. I'm actually moving him up as we speak here. It's good that he's healthy. I was a little concerned there that he might be limited or out, but it sounds like he's going to be a full go. And he had that stretch there where Colt McCoy played where his target volume was massive. That's a great sign. Colt McCoy, if you look back at his history, has always looked at that inline tight end. So I think you're going to see a lot of Reed. To a lesser extent, drawing a blank now. Niles Paul. But I definitely like Reed. I think he's, without question, a tight end one option and a lot safer than Rudolph as well.
Yeah, and you have to like certainly the prospects for Reed there with Colt McCoy. Boy, I just don't know what happened to Robert Griffin. I don't know if anybody does. Maybe he doesn't even know what happened because, looking back at some of the film study, I saw Ron Jaworski point out yesterday a play where Griffin had 5 receivers open, and he ended up throwing an incomplete pass, just completely broken as a quarterback. But Colt McCoy, it's strange in this strange world. Colt McCoy actually an upgrade, certainly for Jordan Reed there. So intriguing. We know the ceiling's a lot higher than Rudolph the Red Zone Reindeer. All right, back to the chats. Daniel has a question for us in a standard league, and it's a flex question between Marcus Colston, again in a potential shootout, Percy Harvin, who pulled a disappearing act last week. Hopefully that's not, this pattern over and over we see with Percy Harvin. John Brown, Alfred Blue, probably going to shade away from Blue with Foster. Do we have information on that one yet? I'm
He's
not
a go.
Here.
No Foster's go. Full go.
Full go. So Blue's tossed. Charles Sims, probably don't want that one either, or Kenny Stills. So really this comes down to the receivers. Colston, Harvin, Brown, or Kenny Stills. You got to pick one in a standard league for your flex. Who are you going with, Mike?
I'm going to go with Colston. I mean, I know he had that big game last week. I thought, he scored the touchdown, of course, had a couple nice catches, but target volume was a lot lower than expected. That being said, he has to get the target volume in this offense. I mean, he's their number one wide receiver. He and Kenny Stills, of course. They're gonna continue to be busy. I don't expect massive target numbers. I think he'll be right around where his career's been, right around 20%. And that'll be enough in this offense, especially with Pittsburgh here, that allows teams to pass on them pretty well. I think that makes him a top 30 option. It kind of separates him slightly from Harvin coming off the bad game and going up against Miami. Defense that could absolutely shut down Geno Smith without question. This could be a shutout again. It's not crazy to think that can happen. Kenny Stills, of course, right there with Colston. I think it's pretty close, but I'd lean towards the veteran there. And John Brown, going up against Atlanta, it's an opportunity for this Arizona offense. But we're still talking about Drew Stanton here, who's he's competent, but he's not very good. So I'm not overly excited about any of the receivers in that offense. So for me, it's got to be Colston.
Not particularly good, but is $5,400 on DraftKings. So love starting Stanton there. You're going to get some value. All he has to do is score 11 points, and you pretty much got your value out of him. And I certainly think he can do that in that matchup there. Pat, before I toss it over to you, just want to say that Ryan Shazier is inactive. Anybody looking to maybe get him back in your IDP lineups, you're obviously not going to do that. And there's really no other option there in Pittsburgh. Also, though, this is a plus for New Orleans, so you have to like that for this New Orleans offense. So, Pat, do you agree? Is this play Colston, or are you looking at maybe Stills? You also have Harvin and John Brown.
Yeah, Harvin is out for me for the reasons Mike said. That's nothing you really want to delve into at this stage of this season. I do like Colston over Stills because it's a standard league. I think if it was a PPR league, I would probably go with Stills. He's actually running shorter routes. He's running more possession routes than Colston is. His ADOT is a lot lower than Colston's is over the last couple weeks. But I like Colston in the slot. He's going to play more there. He's going to see Bryce McCain, who's not a good cornerback. And he probably has a better chance of scoring. So since it is standard, I will go Colston over Stills.
Yeah, I think that's a fair play there. And as I said earlier, I do like Stills this week, but you're going to go with the guy who has the best chance to score the most points, and that is going to be Colston in this situation. Another IDP question before we get back over to offense. Coming down the home stretch here, 14 minutes left. If you're in the chat, you want to get your questions answered, get them in the queue now. Also, hashtag War Room on Twitter if you're hanging out and watching us on YouTube. And it's a question about linebackers. It's a motley crew of linebackers. He wants three for Gabriel here. Avery Williamson, C.J. Mosley, Josh Malga, Khalil Mack, Preston Brown, Anthony Barr, Koemisi. Sometimes, too, it helps if you guys whittle down the list a little bit and get rid of some of the obvious ones. Like, you're not starting Misi this week. I probably wouldn't start Brown either. I'm not worried about Mack in this case. And so that really leaves us with Williamson, Mosley, Malga, and Barr. Obviously, Williamson starting in a great matchup against the Texans, who are going to run the heck out of the ball. C.J. Mosley is a start every week. So it comes down to Malga and Barr. Barr in a decent matchup. Malga really in a great situation. I think I lean slightly towards Malga there, but it's really close between those two. I do like the matchup, though. I think we're going to see, again, some more C.J. Anderson, so a lot of tackle opportunities in a solo heavy venue. So for me, it's Malga, but just slightly. All right, another question on Twitter here from Ty, or is it Ty? Two flex out of, again, another laundry list of players, so I'll go through this slowly. Terrence West, Julian Edelman, Keenan Allen, Kenny Stills, Boom Herron, Jonas Gray, Matt Asiata, Pierre Thomas. We need two flex for Ty. Who are you going with, Mike?
That was not slow enough for me.
All right. Terrence West, Julian Edelman, Keenan Allen, Kenny Stills, Boom Herron, Jonas Gray, Asiata, and Pierre Thomas.
Asiata and Edelman. And I hope I get everyone. That's too many names, man. You got to cut them down. But I think the top two there. And again, our ranking. If you're asking questions, you're probably a gold subscriber. Our rankings are on the site, so you can very easily go grab these off of there. These simple ones where you're comparing a bunch of names. Also, we have our custom rankings tool where you can actually put your roster in there. It'll compare it to our projections, and it'll give you your optimized lineup basically. So that's another easier way to do it.
Yeah, it's pretty much it's an awesome tool. You can customize it because, hey, scoring systems, we have standard, we have PPR, and they're pretty basic. But some of you guys have some crazy scoring systems. You can do anything you want in there and customize and really get it to spit out, especially for these flex decisions. Put your roster requirements, all of that in there. We have it for IDP too, so folks in IDP. Definitely use this stuff too. I know some of the subscribers are just using it to look at basic projections, rankings. Use these tools. You can't find them anywhere, and they're absolutely awesome, including the DFS tool, which now has a function on it. Say you want to avoid a player. You don't want him in your DFS lineup. We now can avoid players as well. We can lock players into our lineups. We can avoid them, and it's going to optimize the lineups for you. Really fantastic tools that we've been developing this year. So right now, let's get some more of the inactive active news, Mike. Anything else that you see that's caught your eye over the last couple minutes here?
Really interesting one more than anything. The Buccaneers, Austin Seferian-Jenkins, Brandon Myers, Luke Stalker, all out 1 through 3 at tight end there. So if you were, taking a flyer in a deeper league on Seferian-Jenkins, get away from there. And if you're looking, maybe you're desperate from injuries to Thomas, to Charles Clay, those kind of guys. If you're looking for a replacement, just stay away from Tampa Bay. There's nothing to be excited about. They actually just signed DJ Williams and Cameron Brate, and neither of those guys are likely to see an extra target or two. That being said, probably a few extra targets for the running backs, and definitely if you're in desperation mode in a very deep league, maybe like going deep where you start 6 wide receivers, Lois Murphy, probably going to see a bit of an uptick playing majority of his work in the slot there. We've seen him up and down this year, but this is probably going to be a game where he sees a couple extra targets.
Absolutely. And sometimes it really does come down to that, where you're going to have to make these deep plays. Pat,
Yes.
Anything you're seeing here as we're coming down? We got 9 minutes left in the show. Anything sticking out to you in the news across the wire?
Yeah, if you're holding out for Larry Fitzgerald, do yourself a favor. It's a late game. Find somebody else. It says even if he does play, he's going to be very limited. That does add a little bit of juice to John Brown. I guess you could say Michael Floyd, but we don't want to say Michael Floyd. That's a dirty word these days. But John Brown, give him a little bit of a bump. Because Fitzgerald looks like he'll be fairly useless even if he's active, and if you're waiting, go in a different direction.
All right, and also Dwayne Allen, not a big surprise here, inactive. Mike, do we go back to the well with Kobe Fleener here? Do we trust this guy after what he did to us last week?
Yeah, I still like him. The volume has been there. I mean, like I think I said this last week, and it turned out I was low on him. I was kind of surprised. I looked to see where the industry was, and I think he was 3rd last week. And this week, I think it's closer to 10. I still think he's a top 5 option. His targets this season, his fantasy production was up, but his targets were down. Now the targets have to go back up in this offense. So not a ton of concern in an offense. It scores a ton of points. It's a great matchup with Washington here. I think Luck is the number 1 fantasy quarterback this week, and obviously his top targets are going to be fantasy assets as well. So, if you started, if you need a tight end, maybe if one of the other top guys, there's no problem there if you want to sit the guy, but I think Fleener's still a top 5 option.
All right, Richie with a question about this matchup for Lamar Miller. Wilkerson out. Obviously, we know that. We've been through that already. But does this change anything? I mean, really, we were kind of anticipating this one anyway, but the fact that the news is official, he's asking between Lamar Miller and Trey Mason. Now, Mason, obviously, a really interesting play this week. Could see some volume, home game, and this Rams team, it's not because of the crowd, because you could hear a pin drop in that stadium, but they play really well at home. So, you're facing that decision here, Pat, and then we'll go to Mike on the same question. What are you doing? Are you sticking with Mason, or is there any chance you might get Miller in there?
I like them both quite a bit. I do have Mason a little bit higher, and even in daily, you could fit them both on a roster for pretty cheap. I think they're in DraftKings. They're $100 off each other, and they're both very cheaply priced. But yeah, and even though Wilkerson's out, you can figure Miami's going to be able to throw the ball a little bit more. I think that Mason might get a little bit more of the workload than Miller, so that's why I like him a hair. But it's tough to go wrong with either one of those two.
Yeah, Mason, 4,600. Mike, are you sticking with Trey Mason here as well?
Yeah, Denard Robinson and Trey Mason are 2 guys who I think are outstanding plays this week. Mason, Oakland run defense has actually been pretty decent, but I think it's going to be a volume day for Mason. I think he can get over 20 carries and has a great chance to score in this game. So I definitely like him. He does play enough in the passing game to keep him in that running back 1 discussion. I talked about Miller before. Again, it's tough against this Jets run defense in a game where Miami's probably going to attack through the air. But again, I think they're going to score plenty of touchdowns, and he has an opportunity to get one of those. Does a little bit more than Mason as a receiver. But for me, the difference is volume. I think Mason should have probably 5 to 7 more touches today.
Yep, fair enough. I agree with that take. This could be a nice game for Mason, especially just based on that volume. Troy with a question. In a standard league for his flex, coming down to Cecil Shorts, Kyle Rudolph, or Michael Floyd. Mike, what are you doing there? Shorts in a potentially good situation. Rudolph, we talked about earlier. We haven't actually mentioned Floyd at all today.
Yeah, I mean, it's close for me. I'm going to go with shorts up against the Giants. I mean, Pat kind of mentioned exactly what I was going to say earlier. I think this is an upset special here. I think Jacksonville's a great chance to pull this off. It's one of their better opportunities to get a win this season. And Shorts is their number one wide receiver. He gets force-fed the ball when they don't have any other great options. And with Robinson out, they don't. I mean, Lewis is coming on. He's okay. Obviously, Marquise Lee was busy in garbage time last week. But Shorts is their top wide receiver. And, the matchup on the outside may not be great, but I think Shorts just has to be throwing the ball quite often. And I do like him more than Floyd, who, he should not see as many targets as Shorts and is very dependent on the long touchdown. It is not a terrible matchup here with Atlanta, of course, but, I think Shorts maybe has a lower ceiling, we'll say, but it's a significantly safer play.
What do you think, Pat?
I echo everything Mike just said. Floyd's a guy that is kind of a home run guy, but even when he scored those 2 touchdowns a couple weeks ago, he did that on 2 catches. So he's the very definition of boom or bust, and they have a fairly good matchup against Atlanta for their running game as well. So I think Shorts is going to get more of the volume. I think he's the safer play.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you there. KVC has a really rough running back situation, and he's got he's got to pick 2 to start. Ryan Matthews, blue. We're tossing blue. He's not going to see enough action today. Then 2 Tampa Bay running backs: Doug Martin, Charles Sims, or Marcel Reese. Boy, oh boy, Mike. I think Matthews is obviously the best option here. Who else are you going with?
Oof, yeah, this is not an ideal situation here. I'm going to go with Sims here. I'm just going to hope Sims comes out and maybe gets it going finally. I think he is the most upside of this group. Bluey, obviously, he can't play. Foster's going to come back and be a workhorse. He's my top-ranked running back today. Martin and Sims, pretty close in touches and snaps it should be, but I think Sims has a better chance of, a little higher upside there. And Reese, you don't know what his role is going to be. They hate to use him as a running back. He could come out and play a lot today with Murray out, but you can't count on that. He very easily could shift back behind Jones-Drew, so too risky for me.
What about you, Pat?
Yeah, I agree. But Reese is interesting. I mean, if you're if you're a big underdog, you might want to just throw him out there because he could have a big role. He probably has a higher ceiling than Martin and Sims. But yeah, forced to choose between the 2 Bucks running backs, I would go with Sims to pair with Matthews.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Good luck. I really hope that one works out, man. That's a tough situation. Hopefully it does not. Hopefully you've already got the playoff spot locked up. And coming down the home stretch, 3 minutes left. And we have a dynasty question. What a better way to finish off week 13 than a dynasty question about Charles Johnson. And Mike, you briefly talked about him earlier. Pat, I know he's in your column for this week, so you guys have both been looking at him this week. But more so looking towards the future, this was a guy who, sort of bounced around on different, he was Green Bay practice squad with the Browns briefly there. Was a big play guy, essentially, was what he was lining up to be. Does he have long-term dynasty value, or is this just one of those flash in the pans and you don't really want to prioritize him?
Yeah, I'll start out here. I mean, I don't want to go nuts here. I don't think a ton of the guy. I think I could probably find easily 50 better fantasy prospects in Dynasty, maybe even more than that. He's getting a long look here, which is great for all of us to see what he can do, especially those who have been stashing him. He's not really jumping out at me. I mean, he looks decent. He's not small. He stands at 6'2". He has decent wheels. But keep in mind, I mean, he was drafted last year in the 7th round. So he makes, how old is he? 22, 23? No, he's already gone on 26 years old. He's 2 full years older than Cordell Patterson, who has a much higher ceiling. I think Patterson at some point will turn a corner and be a capable number 1 wide receiver. We saw him do a ton of damage last season. And maybe next season they use Johnson as the 2, but I don't think that's going to be their plan to have him be a long-term starter. But he's a couple of games here. We'll get a nice look at him and see what he can do. But I think best case scenario he's probably going to be maybe a wide receiver 5 in fantasy. So I wouldn't be too excited about him.
Pat?
I'm a little bit more bullish on him than Mike is, but he brings up a great point about his age. That was something that was even talked about last year when Green Bay grabbed him. I mean, Ted Thompson drafted him. Ted Thompson knows a little bit about drafting wide receivers. So he kind of just couldn't fit on their practice squad. The Browns grabbed him. I think he tore his ACL. So he's had some adversity. But like Mike said, he's a pretty big receiver. He's really fast. And he's got a good shot here. I mean, Greg Jennings is in the twilight of his career. Patterson's still a work in progress. He's kind of going to grow with Bridgewater a little bit. I wouldn't go crazy trying to get him. At this stage, his value might be a little bit frothy because the metrics community is enamored with him. But no, he's certainly interesting. I have him on my roster in the PFF Dynasty League, and I've sat on him for a while. So I'm a little bit more bullish, but I can see more of a wide receiver 3 upside than a 5.
See, I think he's a player that if you own right now, you unload and you try and get some good value for him, because I don't know if we're going to see his value approach this anytime soon. This is maybe the high water mark. So a good move there. One quick thing to say before we're out of here, Vontaze Burfict inactive. We did expect that, so Vinny Ray will again be an every down player for the Bengals. But other than that, best of luck. We're going to be back next week for the playoff run starting Week 14. Best of luck to you in Week 13. Enjoy the games. Enjoy that New England-Green Bay game. For Pro Football Focus, for Mike Clay, for Pat Thorman, I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and that's a wrap.